What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live in living color from the Radio What studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter? It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, please jump on over to DJLittleRock.com. Come on by. The water's fine. I don't know. If it's a pool party, maybe the water's fine. Check availability and get a free price quote. And maybe you can have me at your next event. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous? Use the hashtag What Makes You Famous and find it everywhere. What makes you smarter? Well, let's find out. Let's do it together right here on the program.
Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1. U.S. coronavirus deaths reached 10,000. The U.S. coronavirus death toll reached 10,000 on Monday, hitting 10,993, as Trump administration officials warned the nation was heading into what will be a painful week. The total number of cases in the United States rose to 368,449. New York remained the epicenter of the outbreak in the United States, but Governor Andrew Cuomo, Democrat, said the state could be seeing a flattening of the curve as the daily death count remained below Saturday's figure for the second straight day. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said that with hundreds still dying every day, the city might have to hold temporary burials in a park for some victims as funeral homes are overwhelmed, then remove them to be buried elsewhere after the crisis ends. This is according to the Washington Post. Number 2, Boris Johnson transferred to intensive care. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was transferred to intensive care on Monday as his COVID-19 symptoms worsened significantly after he was admitted to a London hospital for tests. Johnson was diagnosed 10 days ago, becoming the first world leader to test positive for the novel coronavirus. Johnson's spokesman, James Slack, said, quote, "The PM remains in charge of the government," end quote. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab was designated as his replacement if he becomes incapacitated. Quote, "The government's business will continue," end quote, Raab said. Johnson's rapid decline took the nation by surprise as it came hours after he tweeted thanks to the National Health Service and said he was in good spirits. This is according to the Associated Press and BBC News. Number 3, Wisconsin Supreme Court overturns attempt to delay primary. The Wisconsin Supreme Court overruled Governor Tony Evers' Democrat last-minute order to stop in-person voting ahead of the state's Tuesday Democratic presidential primary and local and state elections due to the coronavirus pandemic. Evers had called for pushing the balloting back to June 9th, saying in-person balloting would endanger voters and poll workers. But the state's highest court sided with Republicans, who controlled the state legislature and challenged Evers' order. Evers also wanted to reopen the period for requesting absentee ballots, which ended Friday. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled 5-4 on Monday night that Wisconsin voters must hand-deliver their absentee ballots by Tuesday evening or have them postmarked April 7th, overruling a lower court that had extended absentee voting for 6 days. This is according to CNN and Politico. Number 4, Trump agrees to let hospital ship treat coronavirus patients. President Trump on Monday agreed to allow treatment of coronavirus patients on the Navy hospital ship Comfort, which is docked in New York City. The 1,000-bed ship was sent to the city to help ease the burden of local hospitals overwhelmed with people infected with COVID-19. But it was supposed to treat patients seeking other types of care. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, Democrat, however, asked Trump to make the change. Quote, "We don't need the Comfort for non-COVID cases. We need it for COVID," end quote. Cuomo said Monday when he announced the agreement with Trump. COVID-19 patients will be examined at area hospitals before being transferred to the Comfort. As of Saturday, the Comfort had seen only 27 patients. This is according to CNBC. Number 5, U.S. labels white supremacist group a terrorist organization. The U.S. government has, for the first time, designated a white supremacist group as a foreign terrorist organization. The State Department on Monday assigned the label to the Russian imperial movement. It also named 3 of the group's leaders as terrorists. Quote, this illustrates how seriously this administration takes the white supremacist terrorist threat, end quote, said the State Department's counterterrorism coordinator, Nathan Sales. The Russian imperial movement's leaders were hit with sanctions on Monday, and the move made it illegal for Americans to conduct transactions with the group. The relatively small group reportedly offers paramilitary training to neo-Nazis and white supremacists in St. Petersburg, Russia. This is according to the New York Times and the Associated Press. Number 6, Navy Secretary calls ousted commander naive or stupid, then apologizes. The acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly, told sailors on Monday that Captain Brett Crozier, the former commander of the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt, who was ousted for criticizing his superiors for not reacting adequately to curb a coronavirus outbreak on board, was either, quote, too naive or too stupid to command a ship, end quote. Later Monday, Maudley apologized for the remark, saying he didn't think Crozier was, quote, naive or stupid, end quote, but, quote, that he sent his alarming email with the intention of getting it into the public domain, end quote. Maudley relieved Crozier of his command, saying he had exercised, quote, poor judgment, end quote, by distributing the scathing email to his superiors. Last week, a widely circulated video shows the crew cheering Crozier when he left the ship. This is according to the Washington Post and CNBC. Number 7, domestic abuse calls increase under coronavirus lockdowns. Domestic abuse hotlines around the world have received a surge in calls since stay-at-home orders have been imposed to curb the spread of the COVID-19 coronavirus. A spokesperson for the U.S. National Domestic Violence Hotline told Forbes on Monday that it had received 2,345 calls since mid-March from people citing the coronavirus as a factor in their abuse. The UK's largest domestic abuse charity said Monday that calls to its helpline had increased by 25% since lockdowns were put into place. The United Nations on Sunday urged governments around the world to fight the rise in domestic violence. Quote, I urge all governments to put women's safety first as they respond to the pandemic, end quote. Secretary General Antonio Guterres tweeted. This is according to Forbes and the New York Times. Number 8, U.S. stocks surge as coronavirus spread slows in hot spots. U.S. stocks soared on Monday as the spread of the coronavirus outbreak in the country appeared to slow. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 7.7%. The S&P 500 rose by 7%, and the NASDAQ rose by 7.3%. There were 33,260 new cases on Saturday and just 28,200 on Sunday, according to the data from Johns Hopkins. Death rates slowed in Europe, reinforcing hopes that the pandemic, which has forced business closures that have ravaged the economy, could be nearing its peak. U.S. stock index futures pointed to further gains at Tuesday's open. This is according to CNBC. Number 9, Australian court overturns Cardinal George Pell's abuse convictions. Australia's High Court on Monday overturned the convictions of Cardinal George Pell, the most senior Catholic leader ever found guilty of sexually abusing children. Pell was found guilty in 2018 of molesting 2 choir boys in 1996 when he was Archbishop of Melbourne and sentenced to 6 years in prison. Australia's High Court on Tuesday overturned his convictions after finding the jury, quote, ought to have entertained a doubt as to the applicant's guilt with respect to each of the offenses for which he was convicted, end quote. Pell, who once served as an advisor to Pope Francis and was the Vatican's chief financial officer, has spent the last 13 months in prison. This is according to CNBC News. Number 10, body of Kennedy family member recovered. Maryland authorities said Monday they had found the body of Maeve Kennedy Townsend McKeon, daughter of former Maryland Lieutenant Governor Kathleen Kennedy Townsend and granddaughter of the late Robert F. Kennedy, after a 4-day search. McKeon, executive director of Georgetown University's Global Health Initiative, was found in 25 feet of water more than 2 miles from her mother's residence in Anne Arundel County. McKeon, 40, and her 8-year-old son, Gideon Joseph Kennedy McKeon, went missing on Friday after setting out on a canoe to get a ball one of them had kicked into the water, and were pushed out into Chesapeake Bay by winds or currents. The overturned canoe was found that night. Police said they would continue the search for Gideon McKeon on Tuesday. This is according to the Baltimore Sun and the New York Times. That's 10 things you need to know today for Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. I know it's getting pretty grim out there. Hopefully, we'll have better news real soon. Stay tuned to What Makes You Smarter. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. It's Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here.
If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at Smarter What, and YouTube. Username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me/Keys Dan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for